Philip, how you doing this morning?
Oh, I couldn't be better. It's a little dreary outside, but we're warm and dry in here, and looking forward to another good discussion from the Book of Mark.
Yeah, me too. Dreary outside, and one of those days where I always say I love technology. So
Yeah, absolutely. Technology is a great thing when it works.
Nobody else knows some of the problems that we have. We are in Mark chapter 3. And we're going to look at the first 12 verses. Yeah, first 12 verses today. Interesting section. Mm-hmm. Got a couple of things in here that will, I think, not only help a person understand something about Jesus, but maybe also about ourselves and how we tend to think about things. Let me read this, and then we'll come back and talk about it a little bit. He entered again into a synagogue, and a man was there whose hand was withered. They were watching him to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Get up and come forward." And he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to kill?" But they kept silent. After looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately began conspiring with the Herodians against him as to how they might destroy him. Jesus withdrew to the sea with his disciples, and a great multitude from Galilee followed, and also from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from Idumea, and from beyond the Jordan, and the vicinity of Tyre and Sidon. A great number of people heard of all that he was doing and came to him. And he told his disciples that a boat should stand ready for him because of the crowd, so that they would not crowd him. For he had healed many, with the result that all those who had afflictions pressed around him in order to touch him. Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they would fall down before him and shout, "You are the Son of God." And he earnestly warned them not to tell who he was. All right, interesting passage here.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of things there that we need to talk about, I think. And here's Jesus early on healing people, and his fame is spreading evidently by the crowds that are pressing toward him.
Yeah. No internet, no newspaper, no radio, TV.
No, not even a town crier. But the thing is, I think that, Bill, when we're sick, when we have an illness, when we have some sort of physical malady, we're really willing, in most cases, to go to the ends of the earth to find healing and to cure. Yeah. And in that respect, these people are acting just as we would today, going to a specialist or going to an out-of-state doctor.
Yes. And I think it tells us something about the appeal of Jesus. I mean, who could have a problem with a guy who's able to cure diseases and injuries and all that kind of stuff? I just think it's almost a no-brainer to understand why, at least at this point in time, Jesus had such amazing appeal to so many people, and obviously they're coming from all over the place.
Yeah, and Jesus didn't care if they were in network or out of network with their insurance.
Yeah, no PPO, no HMO.
That's right. Just being facetious, but they wanted to be healed.
Right, they did. And so it's interesting because at kind of the heart and center of this little episode is the Sabbath once again. The Sabbath will be an issue on several occasions between Jesus and his opposition. And folks will question him. They will find fault with him. This is a real problem for folks in this day and time. So, and there's a lot of good reason for that. I think we should be probably a little more understanding of where some of these folks are coming from as far as Sabbath is concerned. We don't relate to Sabbath in the same way that people in this day and time did. For us, that's an ancient thing. It's an Old Testament thing. We've never lived under, most of us anyway, have never lived under a system where we observe the Sabbath. Yeah, we've read about it and we should know about it and all that. But you think about, if you think about and sort of try to understand from their point of view, as far as the Jews are concerned, Sabbath goes all the way back to creation. The Sabbath is the day that God rested. From there, Sabbath becomes part of the Mosaic system. Israel was required to keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath, keep it holy.
Well, it would be easy, I think, to condemn these Pharisees for their anger at Jesus, but over time, as we talked about before, the Sabbath had evolved into a litany of things that you could and could not do. As men looked at the Sabbath and whether you could gather sticks or cook or whatever you wanted to do, the rules became more burdensome.
Oh, yeah. Just minute things to determine how far you could walk, things that constituted work or did not constitute work. And that issue will be one that Jesus has to confront on more than one occasion. It's a problem because on the one hand, you've got people who I think that you could say who are honestly trying to observe and to do what they believe God wanted them to do as far as the Sabbath is concerned. But on the other hand, in order to do that, they basically made a mess of it. Okay, it's become tedious. It's become a burden. That word that you mentioned, I think, is an appropriate word. It's become a burden. Sabbath was not necessarily any longer a day in which you could meditate more on God and try to understand God better. It now has become a day where you're so busy trying to keep all the rules and regulations that you almost don't have any time at all to think deeply on what the Sabbath was all about.
Right.
So it's become a real problem. And then you got Jesus who comes along and just kind of seems to penetrate just immediately through all of that stuff. And I've said before, it's kind of like, you got these Pharisees over there with their little balloon on a stick, and Jesus has a needle. Pow! And he does seem to kind of bust the balloon at times. He does seem to push the envelope, but I think he does it, with a good purpose in mind, and trying to help people see some things that they might not otherwise be able to see.
Right.
But it does. I think it helps explain what their problem was. I mean, sometimes I want to go to the Pharisees. What is your problem? And then if I make the effort to try to see things from the Pharisees' point of view, not to excuse them or somehow make them right, but just to understand where they're coming from, I think I have a better appreciation of what their struggle was. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Jesus obviously has a different concept.
Yeah, and like your illustration of the balloon and the needle, Jesus turns the tables around and asks them some questions.
Oh, yeah.
That the best answer is to keep silent.
Yeah. There's no way to answer these questions.
Right.
There's no way. The question is in verse 4. Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? To save a life or to kill? Let me think. Okay, there's no good way. If you're a Pharisee and Jesus has given you these two choices as to permissible things on the Sabbath, if you say, for example, well, sure, it's okay to do good on the Sabbath, then what you might unknowingly do is you might unknowingly do away with some of the prohibitions that exist because those prohibitions actually keep you from doing what is good. Mm-hmm. I think that goes a long way to explaining their trouble with Jesus healing on the Sabbath. He's doing good. What is your problem, guys?
Right.
What is your problem? He's doing good. But if you say it's okay to do good, then you've just given Jesus permission to do good on the Sabbath.
You're violated your own law.
Yeah. If you say it's okay to do evil on the Sabbath, which nobody, I don't think, would say, but just assume that you did say it's okay to do evil on the Sabbath, then even if it's within the rules and regulations that have been created around the Sabbath, if you do evil within those rules and regulations, you still obviously have violated God's will.
Right.
So that you just can't come out of this thing with a good answer. So,
and I think they realized that, but they kept silent.
Yeah. Smart move.
Smart move.
Sometimes that is the best answer.
Yes.
I don't have an answer for that question.
And it's interesting that he asked these questions before healing the man.
Yeah.
I mean, that was like adding salt to the wound.
Yes.
Heal the guy.
Yeah, because he knows what's going on in their minds. Mm-hmm. Okay. He calls the guy up, and now everybody's sitting back, okay, we're going to see what he's going to do here. And now he throws these questions at them. And so they're busy. And I have to wonder, are they all sitting there, with their brows furrowed and they're deep in thought? Or are they over there going, how do we, little huddle? How would you? I don't know. I can envision both of those things happening. But then he just calls the guy up, and because he's angry, he's grieving that this kind of mindset is preventing these people from really understanding.
And Jesus' response was not only to heal the man with the withered hand, but the Bible here says he was angry.
Yeah,
and he was grieved in his heart.
Yeah,
the emotions of a man.
Yeah, which I think is it's nothing more than it's something being played out in the person of Jesus that we could see in the person of God back in the Old Testament.
Exactly,
because God is never happy when people rebel or when their hearts are hard. And he can't get through to them. I think it causes grief, a divine kind of grief. And now we see Jesus displaying this, and we see it being displayed in the form of a human being. Good.
Yeah, Moses or the Pharaoh in the Old Testament had a hard time with the hardness of the heart.
Yeah,
his people suffered tremendously.
Yeah. Yeah, hard hearts are never
a good thing.
Never a good thing. And you can see that in all sorts of situations. You see it here. You can read about it numerous times back in Old Testament Scripture. It's not uncommon at all in the Bible, this whole thing about people with hard hearts. But even in our own day and time.
That's what I was about to say. Even today, there are multitudes of people whose hearts have been hardened.
Yeah, in many, many, many different ways. Not just, quote, religious ways, but hard hearts when it comes to human relationships, hard hearts in families, hard hearts among friends, hard hearts even in churches. I've known some folks, in church with pretty hard hearts as far as some of their brothers and sisters
Right.
are concerned. So yeah, it's a pretty common kind of thing that it's not a happy deal. Ought to cause more of us to grieve over it, but God certainly does.
Maybe it would be instructive to sort of pull the curtain back and talk about these people that were so angry with Jesus, the Pharisees and the Herodians.
Yeah.
Who were they, and how did they evolve?
Yeah. Pharisees probably go back to the Babylonian captivity time. People who have been removed from their homeland and they're basically in slavery. The question comes, okay, how do we teach our children who we are? How do we teach our children about God? How do we instill in them a sense of identity as the chosen people of God when we're not in our homeland? We can't worship like we're supposed to. Nothing is going right. We can't observe the laws as God expected us and intended for us to do. How do we do that? Well, we have to make a concerted effort to teach them. And so one of the early roots of Phariseeism was that they were educators. They taught the younger generations the Word of God. They ensured that they instilled in them a sense of identity as God's people, so that when they returned to their homeland, at least in hope at that time that they would, that the people would not be ignorant of God or His will. So that's a commendable sort of thing. And so they were known as people who were immersed in Scripture, immersed in the words of the Old, as what we know as the Old Testament.
And very strict adherence to the old law.
Yeah, and one of their stated purposes was to observe the law as well as it could be done.
Right.
Which I think understanding who they were and everything, that who could find fault with that?
That illuminates their concerns here.
Yeah. So, but over time, what happens to maybe most movements, if not all movements, over time, things change. What may have originally been a very commendable effort gets tweaked and turned and twisted a little bit, and it suddenly becomes something different, something other than what it was in the beginning. And so they had created for themselves a system that was far more of a burden than something that would have helped them love God and obey His commandments.
I'm somewhat familiar with the political process today, having worked in Washington some, and it's similar to what happens today. I think that an elected official has a good idea for a certain piece of legislation, and it may be one page long in what that legislation is supposed to do and how it's supposed to do it. But when it goes through the sausage-making process, on the other side, that simple piece of legislation now is 4,000 pages.
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
Yeah. And nobody knows what it says.
We have to pass it before we'll know what's in it.
Yeah. Which is a strange, to me, that's a weird way of thinking.
It is.
But, but speaking of politicians, that brings us to the second group.
Right.
And that's the Herodians. And as you probably could tell from the name, this is a group of people who were politically active in the sense that they were supporters of Herod, the king, which would have put them much more on the side of the Roman government, because Herod basically was a figurehead king set up by the Romans. So that would have been a political party, if you will. That may not be the best term, but that's one I think we can relate to. That would have been a political party who favored Herod and were supportive of whatever he did as a king. Now, this makes for strange bedfellows.
Yes, it does.
Because the Pharisees, if they're going to be consistent with their history, they would not have been Herodians, okay? They would not have been they were probably appalled at Herod and the whole system that the Roman government had set up. That this would not have been satisfactory to them whatsoever. You would have not found Pharisees and Herodians dining together down at the cafe. Okay, they just wouldn't.
Yeah, and maybe they had this conversation that said maybe we need to pose as a united front.
Yeah.
We can argue another day, but let's, in the eyes of people, let's be united in our opposition to this man.
Yes, which maybe sort of suggests to us, even though Mark certainly doesn't go into this very much, but I think the fact that Mark brings the Herodians into the discussion probably should help us understand that as people in some kind of leadership role, if you think about it, the Pharisees would have been leaders in the Jewish religion role. Herodians would have had some role in more of the political area. But it does sort of give us an indication that much of what people saw in Jesus as dangerous was indeed political. It was political. They saw Jesus as a threat to Israel as a nation, which is interesting, because there's nothing in Jesus that is a threat to Israel, unless your concept of the nation of Israel is somewhat different from what God had in mind to start with. But that's another discussion. But it does kind of hint at the underlying things that are going on. And we'll see more of that as we go through this. But I have mentioned before in some other situations that movie that Mel Gibson did about the Passion of the Christ.
Right.
In that movie, I thought there was a pretty good presentation. And of course, it's not because there are Bible verses that talk about this stuff, but it was in a movie way of trying to explain the behind-the-scene machinations that went on in the betrayal of Jesus and whatnot, because there's certainly things that went on between the Sanhedrin and the Roman government, between the priests and Pilate. There's a lot of stuff in the background that's going on that ultimately brings about the crucifixion of Jesus. But it kind of gets its impetus to begin here, which is a weird thing. But those questions that Jesus asked, I think, are interesting. In here, I think we might find some reasons to think about our own selves. You know, we don't keep the Sabbath. That's not part of our deal. You know, and we kind of look at it as an ancient Old Testament thing. Oh yeah, the Jews did that, and so we don't have a mental or emotional or even much of a spiritual connection to Sabbath. But we might tend to transfer some of that same thinking, you know, to Sunday, as an example. So if we think that the only people who can develop problems would be ancient Pharisees and others over the Sabbath, we might want to sit up and take note of the fact that maybe we can end up with some of the same sorts of problems. Different, but somewhat similar. I've had people ask in one way or another? How many times do we need to go to church on Sunday? And I feel like I should be a Pharisee or a Herodian. I can't answer that question, because it doesn't matter what number I throw out. They're going to try to figure out how to do one less, which is fine. I understand it, but that's the problem. The question is, can we create something out of today's Sunday, where we treat it with the same mindset that these folks were treating the Sabbath?
Right.
Have we filled it up with so much minutia, even good minutia? Have we created unhelpful rules and regulations that if Jesus were to ask us about our Sunday, would it be lawful to do good or evil on Sunday? We might have a hard time answering that, mostly because we think it's a trick question. So very hard for us to do anything legitimate with that. But it's worth thinking about, because I do believe that it's possible for us to create unnecessary rules and regulations, and then people begin to get so concerned about all the rules and the regulations, they miss the whole point. Why are we gathering together on a Sunday? Why did people observe the Sabbath back in the Old Testament? Why are we observing the first day of the week in our day and age? What's the point? But if your mind and heart is so tied up and balled up by stuff, that may or may not have anything to do with the actual keeping of the day, or observing the day, then we can end up with the same struggles.
Absolutely, we can. Yeah.
So he goes on and withdraws from there. I don't blame him. But there's all these people. People from everywhere coming out to see him and to be around him. And here's an occasion where he gets into a boat, and on another occasion you can read about him preaching from a boat. Because the crowds are just all around him. And I used to have a hard time relating to this until I was in the Air Force. And I remember one of my tours in the Air Force, I went to Thailand and spent a year in Thailand. And I will never forget the first time that I left base and went to town. A bunch of us guys went down to town to sightsee and that kind of stuff. And you ride the bus into town, and you get off the bus, and you are immediately mobbed by Samlar drivers. Samlar, the little bicycle thing with the carrier on the back, And it's just odd because they're grabbing you, and they're hanging on to you, and there are 5 of them. You can't hardly move because they're all up against you, And I think about that when I read this, and that was just a very small group of Samlar drivers, and I can imagine how Jesus felt. How many people? Were there dozens? Were there hundreds? People are coming from all over the place to see him, and these are people that are either probably ill themselves, or they're bringing somebody that they care about. So you got all these people, they're just crowd, you can't even move. So I understand getting in the boat.
Yeah, these people that are coming to see Jesus because of whatever ails them, were they also Jews?
Yeah.
So they were willing to sacrifice the keeping of the Sabbath for them to be healed.
Yeah, see, that's weird. That's the weird thing.
That is a weird point.
Yeah, that's the weird thing. And who knows? Now, are we still on the Sabbath here? I'm not sure. Because he does withdraw to the sea, so I don't know.
Right.
Maybe we're into the first day of the week.
Right.
At this point, that's entirely possible. I'm not sure Mark has left us on a Sabbath here.
Okay.
But all these people, and it's all because Jesus is healing folks, and that's understandable. Now, this section ends with Mark mentioning unclean spirits. And evidently, this is not an unusual thing, because verse 11 says, whenever the unclean spirits saw, and the way this reads is like, oh yeah, there are all these, not only are these people, there's an unclean spirit. And whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they would fall down before him, and they would shout, "You are the Son of God." Now, I take it that, Mark says it's an unclean spirit, but I think you have to read this as a person who has been overwhelmed and overtaken by an unclean spirit, because how would you know that an unclean spirit has fallen down? I think people are falling down,
right,
who are possessed by unclean spirits, and the unclean spirit is crying out, "You are the Son of God." Mm-hmm. And Jesus' response is, "Shut up, don't say anything."
And that was wise, because he didn't want the endorsement of an unclean spirit.
Who would want the endorsement of? That would have played right into the hands of Pharisees and Herodians. If you were looking for a good reason to do away with Jesus, just go report it. Hey, you should hear the unclean spirits talk about this guy. The only guy that really likes him are the unclean spirits. Now, that would not have been a very good.
Yeah, politicians today are sometimes hesitant to accept the endorsement of a certain group or a certain person, because it might be looking like it was a negative thing.
Yeah.
This guy's endorsing me and he's doing all these things. I want to distance myself from him.
Yeah, and just remember what often happens in the press, for example. You go back 20 years, and now somebody finds a picture of this politician with some unsavory character.
Right.
Okay. And now they use that picture to now draw questions about the politician. Well, maybe that's legitimate. Maybe it's not. Just because a guy appears in a picture with somebody really doesn't mean much. You might need to go a tad deeper than that.
The fact that it was 20 years ago, too.
Yeah. But the mere appearance in one picture of this politician with some unsavory individual is enough for a lot of people to make a big deal out of it.
Right.
Now, so just think about what it would have been for Jesus to have a bunch of unclean spirits running around vouching for him. Probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I don't think that would work.
Probably not a good idea. All right, so that's how this section ends. A lot to think about, really helping us to understand how the opposition of Jesus is beginning to develop and grow. But it's a terrific insight.
And plus, it gives us some parallels to today.
Yeah.
People are people.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Good or bad.
Good or bad. It doesn't matter the technology or the other things that have surfaced over the decades. People are still people.
Yes, they sure are. Well, thank you again for being with us. Hopefully this little discussion has been helpful to you, and hopefully it spurs your own thinking about the Gospel of Mark. We certainly encourage you to read it for yourself, and maybe our discussion, our questions is something that will help you dig deeper into the text.
And next time we will continue in Mark chapter 3, and we will look at Jesus naming his apostles.
All right, see you next time.